As finance manages the budget, I think finance manages headcount with a lot of collaboration and support from recruiting and talent teams and the people teams. I think it's incredibly important for finance and recruiting to be in lockstep and treat each other as peers and partners throughout the recruiting process and building headcount plans, et cetera. You can't do it without each other.
We're the Headcount people. Our podcast talks about all things headcount management, and our guests are the masters. If you're in charge of planning, managing, or reporting on headcount and headcount spend, we'll help you crack the code on this delicate dance by giving you strategies and tools from the masters themselves. Make sure to subscribe and follow for every new episode right when it drops. Here's your host, Bashar Makija.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Headcount people. We are kickstarting our season 2, and today I have the pleasure of talking to Deirdre Mullen, who's a personal friend, advisor, mentor, and a super VP of finance who just joined a very cool company out of New York called Catalyst. And before we get started, I just wanted to let everybody know is that in season 1, we really focused and got deep into the headcount expense management for companies. That also resulted in an ebook that is now available for download on our website. And this season, we are actually going deeper, understanding the strategic finance, strategic HR narrative, that how leaders in finance and HR and talent can become strategic partners to the CEO. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with Deirdre. Welcome.
Thanks, Tashar. So excited to be here.
So Deirdre, you recently joined Catalyst, but before we go into Catalyst and why don't we start with a quick introduction? Who is Deirdre Mullen? How did she get where she is today? Tell us everything.
My journey to VP of Finance has been an interesting one. So I started in college, I majored in accounting and finance, and I graduated during the financial crisis. So I decided finance is probably not the way to go. So I went the very safe route of accounting. I worked in audit for a few years. So I did internal audit at the Sherwin-Williams, yes, the paint company. And then I worked at PwC, and I got my CPA during that time. And it was a great experience, really loved it. But I really like to build things. And in audit, you kind of feel like you're tearing other people's work down, right? And so I was like, I want to go somewhere small where I can really get my hands dirty and learn a lot. And so I was living in New York at the time. And New York didn't have a huge tech scene at that point. This was like 2012, really just like some retail startups and some media. But I started working at this media startup called Thrillist. And I just fell in love with it. I love being able to be involved with so many different areas of the business, getting to work with executives as like an accountant there, got to really understand how the entire business worked. And so I decided tech and kind of this fast-paced environment was for me. And so I moved out to the Bay Area because at the end of time, tech wasn't so great in New York. And I started working for this consulting firm called Kong Basil that does accounting and finance for startups. I got intro to them when I was interviewing out here. And my first client with them, and really my only client, was Stripe. So this was 2014 when there were like 100 people. You like still eat lunch with John and Patrick. It's like a very different time. And company that is now. And I did consulting for them for about 7 months. And then they asked me to come on board full time. And I couldn't say no to that. Absolutely. So I spent about 3 years in total at Stripe, working on like literally a variety of everything. When I first started there, we just needed help wherever. So I was literally like paying bills. And then as I progressed during my time there, got very involved I helped us get our first like SOC 1 report, which is kind of different for most accounting folks. I managed all of our like international accountants, did all the accounting for like processing, et cetera, and just loved my time there. And so after that, I went to another fintech startup called Funbox, and they do lending for small businesses. If you haven't heard of them. And I started the first accounting hire, and so helped build out the accounting team from one and some outsourced accountants to a full-time team of about 20 people from the US and Israel. And again, got to work on a variety of everything and really owned like the entire accounting process, audit, taxes, everything. And after doing that for about 3 years, we were looking for a new head of FP&A as my peer in that side left. And my CFO was really kind and gave me the opportunity to do it, even though I hadn't had any FP&A experience, because I wanted to get a more diversified finance background. And I knew the business really well, even though it was from an accounting standpoint. So I did that and kind of loved it. Loved getting to work more with other teams when you do an accounting and really kind of the forward-looking approach of the company. And so did that for about a year. And then after COVID was over, or we thought it was over, I took a little bit of a break and I went to remote to be their first FP&A hire. So I led and built out the FP&A team there. We grew in my time there from 300 to over 1,000 people in a year. So it was a really interesting time, especially headcount wise, to be there, as you well know, and also raised our Series C there. So we raised a $300 million round led by SoftBank. And that was most of my time there. I think after that experience, I felt like I had this really well-rounded finance background. I had the accounting side, I had the FP&A side, I've done fundraising. And so I decided I was ready to go and be a leader somewhere. And that kind of led me to Catalyst. It's been a really great first year there.
Thank you for giving us that detailed walkthrough of the experience, because I think that will help set the stage for our conversation. Before we dive into Catalyst, because I have a lot of questions about how you are making finance at Catalyst, but because you've been through fast-paced, high-growth companies, if you have to sit down and just think about some similarities or some differences between Stripe, Funbox, Remote, what comes to mind? Like how are these very similar companies and how are these very different companies from your purview?
Remote and Stripe kind of remind me a lot of each other in some ways. Like they had a very specific, in a good way, like operating rhythm, like this is how we do certain things, how we write emails, how we communicate. They were also both bigger at the time that I left, so it makes sense for a company of that size. And they were also very similar where they were working with these high growth tech companies and be able to grow tremendously with them. I mean, you'll get Stripe and like Shopify, Lyft, all of those got in so early and how Stripe was able to grow as a result of them. And Remote, it was a similar case. Funbox was a little bit smaller, but I think there, what I really loved about it is you just got to work more with everyone in the business and you can really kind of grasp everything that was going on in the business.
Do you believe that there are some best practices or a must-dos that you have brought to Catalyst from your past experience? And also, what are the things that you think, oh, absolutely, I'm not going to repeat that mistake or that process again?
Yeah, I think there are a few, like as both just like a leader and what you do on people standpoint, and then also kind of finance standpoint. So I think as leader and people, I think like most companies say they're super transparent. It's not always the case, unfortunately, but I think that was something that all three of those companies were really good at. So I always try to be as transparent as possible with my team. I mean, especially because finance is frequently working on confidential things or things that you really need to be aware of what's going on with other teams in order to do your job properly. I think having some sort of discipline around, let's not do a meeting for this, or this is how we communicate these ways. Like I'm remote now. A lot of people I work with are in New York. It can just make things a lot easier. On the financial standpoint, I think the biggest thing I've learned throughout all my experiences is like how important it is to get data right early. And so whether that's on the headcount side or on like your revenue side, just having a clean, whether it's a CRM or I'm sure you can imagine how crazy it was at Stripe. You had a zillion bank accounts or Remote. We had 90 something entities when I was there. And so it just makes your life a lot easier as a finance person to have good data earlier because you can make better business decisions quicker. If you set up processes earlier, it's much easier than having to go back and retroactively do them. And then that's on the finance side, on the accounting side too. I mean, if you have to go through an audit and you have to clean up 5 years worth of data, it can be pretty awful and expensive. So I think that's something that I've always tried to really bring to my teams and really brought to Catalyst is, okay, we need to have clean data. We need to have definitions of everything. This is how we look at all the data. And this will make our lives a lot easier. It might be a little pain now, but make all our lives a lot easier in the future.
So invest in the data infrastructure early.
Yeah. Yeah.
I firmly believe that you are on this path to becoming CFO, right? And you've got this amazing experience. For someone who is either midway through this journey or embarking on this journey, was it serendipitous that you started in accounting and then you got to this, or was there some method to that madness? Or if not, what do you suggest people do to get that well-rounded experience to become first the VP of finance and then the CFO at a fast-growing company?
I think being in accounting made me have like the foundation of this is how a company operates really well. You have to kind of get into the weeds of every single department really well with accounting that maybe you wouldn't have to if you were like in strategic finance, for instance. And so I think that really helped me understanding how everyone operates, what they're responsible for, best ways to partner with folks. But I do think, it wouldn't really have mattered. That helped to me. It wouldn't really have mattered that much if I started in accounting or in finance. I think the things that were best for me is I'm able to collaborate with others pretty easily. I think that's really, and it's a skill. You have to obviously work on it, but being able to collaborate and communicate with non-finance folks, it's not always easy, right? To just explain to them, hey, you have to meet these goals because of X, Y, and Z, or but you can't have this budget because of this, or like, hey, your team isn't performing, but I noticed that this metric is off. So maybe you need to change your incentive plan and then we can get back on track. So I think that that in particular has been what's made me successful in both the accounting world and the finance world. And now kind of in this leadership role is being able to collaborate well with non-finance folks and then really being able to communicate the why I'm asking you of this. I promise I'm not just a huge pain. This is important for X reasons, or why I'm pushing you on this particular issue. So I think companies can often be scared to partner with finance, but I think they can be a really good tool to utilize if you are able to collaborate with them well. So I always try to be a good partner to everyone.
Let's talk about Catalyst, right?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I had decided after the fundraising experience at Remote and everything, it was a great time. I loved my team there, really one of the best teams I've ever worked with. I just decided it was time for me to go into leadership. And so this was actually the first job in a while that I actually applied to and didn't get reached out to or a reference or something. But I really loved what they were doing. And so for those of you who don't know, Catalyst is a customer growth platform. So we service anyone on the post-sale side. So AEs, AMs, customer success teams, CROs, and we take all your data, we unify it in order to give you insights on your customers that help increase gross and net retention. I had seen in my time at Remote had tremendous expansions. It was really impressive. And a lot of that came from, we had a great sales team, but a lot of it came from the CS team. And they were doing such a great job servicing our existing customers and growing with them. And so I think that's particularly with kind of the shift in the tech environment, that's been more of a trend, right? Not growth at all costs. Let's find you some good customers. Let's grow with them. And I think CS function is somewhat new. And so maybe they're a little bit less valued than they should be. And I think that's starting to shift, and CS and sales are really uniting. So Catalyst or CRO oversees CS. And I've seen that happen in a lot of organizations. That is kind of how I chose that Catalyst would be a good place for me, is I just really like what they're doing in the space right now. And I think it's been kind of undervalued in the past, but that's where the market is shifting towards. So I applied, new investors that I really admired and had worked with some of them in the past at past companies, went through a very rigorous interview process, and there I am. So it will surprise you. You can sometimes get even executive leadership roles just through a LinkedIn application.
Yeah, that's a great story. And I think it just opens the door that if you have the will to get something done, you follow the process, things will happen for you, right? That's awesome. Yeah. So I think what I'm really interested in to dig deep now is your first 30, 60, 90, because did you join right at Series B? Is that right?
I joined, sure. So we raised a B1 in March of 22. And so I joined about 6 months after that. So it was kind of insiders only round, but yeah, I joined about 6 months
Right.
after.
And then, so there's this whole new push around strategic finance, or finance not spending all of this time in record keeping, but spending more of their time informing the business. And
Yeah.
I think finance always had the seat on the table, but they were reporting numbers at the end of the day,
Yeah.
rather than saying, hey, now here is
People
how,
are listening to us now.
right? People are,
Yeah.
yes, we can say that.
Yeah.
So it's like, walk us through the 30, 60, 90 with that lens of you becoming a strategic partner to the CEO and to the founders and to the e-staff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I, again, joined in October, and I was lucky enough to join the same time as our new CRO. So he joined us from outreach. He was their first sales hire, and we saw them from inception until about a year ago. So grew them over 100 million in ARR, and has been a great partner to me. So we started at the same time, and there are a few things that we decided to really partner heavily on. So I probably work with, outside of like the rest of the leadership team, I probably work with the GTM teams more than anything. And so one thing that we started doing is we started doing this weekly, we call weekly revenue meeting. And it is with sales, CS, marketing, finance, RevOps. And I put together basically where we're performing every stage of the funnel, by channel, by new business, existing, versus week over week, versus plan, versus last quarter, how we're tracking. And so all of us get together every week to review that together to see how we're performing. So we all have a pulse on the metrics. And so we can pivot very quickly if we need to. So that's something that one of the first things I instituted along with Mark when I first joined, so we could all kind of be aware of what our metrics were. Because before I joined, we outsourced accountants, outsourced CFO, which was great, but we probably didn't have that like real-time view of how we were performing. So that was one of the first things I did. Another thing was we had a fairly confusing pricing strategy prior to myself and Mark joining. And so we realized it was a little harder to sell and also harder to extract expansions through, which is obviously we're a customer growth platform trying to help other companies grow through their existing customers. We should be able to do that too. So we modified our pricing and packaging after a quarter there together to be easier to sell as well as have more expansion opportunity. And then I think another thing I did in my first 90 days is I started in October. Our fiscal year starts February 1st. So had to build out a full new plan for the following year. And so not only revamping the entire revenue plan from the ground up, but also really going through all of our expenses, saying, do we need to spend this? Do we need this many licenses? Like, do we really need this hire? Not only putting in place a good budget and expectations, but also a good spend approval process. So if anything is outside the budget or we're renewing a contract, et cetera, finance can kind of be one of the first people and they know for that. So there are no surprises, and we can always make sure that we're staying on track for budgets. And once you establish those things pretty early and people know, okay, these are my parameters, you don't need that much work. It's not crazy throughout the year doing BVAs all the time because people already kind of know I have to spend within this and finance has already approved all that.
How did this organization that has been doing fairly well, has been able to raise so much money, and now you come in and you're changing or implementing new processes. How do you think finance leaders can influence the organization's markup and say, what, this is a better way? How do you get buy-in? How do you do change management?
Yeah. So I think I was a little fortunate when I joined Catalyst because the market was shifting too, right? And so it was no longer this growth at all costs. And so people were kind of expecting that to happen. But I think the most important thing, regardless of what kind of market you're in, is just really being able to work with people. Like, okay, you want X for this new software. Okay, well, what will this do? Will this get us more leads? Will this help conversion? Will this make your team more efficient? Is there another software or even like Headcount down the road that we can say, okay, we don't need this because we invested in the system. So I think I always try to collaborate in that way. And it might not be that we can still get to a yes, but I think if you try to work with people and you try to like understand their whys and they understand where you're coming from, it just makes it a lot easier and people feel more comfortable coming to you and not just thinking, okay, finance always just says no. That's not the case. It's just often you need to have some rationale for why you want to do what you want to do. So I'd recommend finance leaders always collaborate and non-finance leaders always come with the why and how it'll impact the financials in whatever way.
Let's take one more practical example because changing pricing is a huge deal. Were there some indicators from the business or from the data that told you that pricing needs to be revamped?
We wanted to be able to improve our retention metrics. And so honestly, we were growing very well in new business bookings, but in expansions, we just didn't have that many levers. We only had one SKU at the time. And our seat structure just didn't allow for a lot of growth. And so the pricing didn't really change so much for new customers. Like our ASP, I think, stayed pretty flat quarter over quarter when we made this change. It was just more so that this gave us more opportunity to grow with our existing customers. So as they grew, and also a lot of companies, we host a ton of data for our customers. And so as they grow, our costs grow. So this just allowed us to make sure that we were growing alongside them.
Clearly, there is a new, I would say, renewed importance given to profitable growth. And you also mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that data and clean data is basically very, very important in order to make any meaningful business decision. Can we talk a little bit about your current finance tech stack? Either directly that finance is buying or something that you're logging into and pulling data from. So walk us through the landscape of the tools that you're using today.
Yeah. So I guess first, when I started at Catalyst, what was in place is we're pretty simple. We have one entity, thank goodness. So we have QuickBooks Online for that. And that works great to a certain point, especially if you're a one entity company. So I think we'll be using that for the foreseeable future. We had Bill.com and Novin for credit cards. And that was, like travel. That was kind of it. We had a pretty good RevOps team that was keeping our CRM in pretty good shape. So that's great. We're also SaaS business. It's not too complex compared to like my past lives at FinTech. So I think the most important thing for me was where can I easily access this data and verify that it's in a good space. And then also as we keep growing, how can I make sure that we continue to have clean data? So one of the first things I put in place was Mosaic for forecasting, and we use it for forecasting as well as kind of like our KPI tool. We use it to conduct those weekly revenue meetings I was mentioning. So it takes data from Salesforce and QBO, from Sequoia. We're mostly using it on like top line side right now, not as much on operating expenses because our OpEx has been fairly flat, but we've been using that and it's been phenomenal for that. It did take some time to set up, but great tool. And it makes my life a lot easier when I'm trying to do numbers for board deck, for investor meetings, et cetera, and has been really wonderful to use. Something else I always like putting in place is a great tool for procurement. So just making sure that people are requesting spend before they actually go and spend it. So finance can be aware. And so we can ensure that we're getting the best price and that tool that's in the budget. And if not, that we have over using it. So we're going to be using, we're about to put in place Airbase where we met at Catalyst. So in the past, I've also used like Zip and Vendor for that. And they're all great tools. Airbase just allows us to consolidate credit card spend and procurement. And then I think luckily we had a pretty clean CRM, more so when we started adding new SKUs, et cetera, then you just have to, or like if you want to slice and dice the data different ways, you just have to make sure that everything works the way you're looking at it. So myself and my one team member are constantly working with RevOps, our CS team, our AEs, making sure that everything is in a good spot in Salesforce. I would say once we get a little bit bigger, we'll probably want to think about better ERP, like NetSuite or something along those lines.
Before we get into the planning for the new year, because I have a lot of questions around that, is that the most logical next step as companies grow is moving from QuickBooks to NetSuite. But you have put in more modern tools in place already. Outside of NetSuite, what is some other tool or areas of spend that you want to be tracking? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, we're not growing headcount massively right now, but when we are, I'll be hitting you up.
You mentioned the headcount, which is great.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure I keep checking in every 3 months. But
Yeah.
tell me about how should a company make a decision to put in a headcount management tool? I personally feel that there's not enough education in the market on managing this large bucket of spend. Everybody talks about procurement all day long and vendor management and card spend.
Mhm.
People don't talk as much about headcount. Well, why do you think that is, and why do you think they should?
I don't know why that is. It baffles me why people don't. I mean, it counts like 70% of your spend, right? Where like OpEx or SaaS is like 10 to 20. And yet there are a zillion options for procurement and one great player for headcount right now. So I can't believe that there aren't more tools in the market for that. You know, for me right now at Catalyst, we're just not growing headcount that much just because we're trying to keep burn in a good spot while we keep trying to grow our ARR. But I would say, and I'm pretty aligned with the people team, with leadership, that everything goes through Deirdre. And so I can manage it myself because it's not too much. When it gets to the point where you can't manage it easily through one person, or you have so many different systems of record. So talk about my experience at Remote in a second. I think that's definitely when you should invest in a headcount tool. And I know a lot of people aren't hiring as much as they were in the current tech environment, but I do think as soon as things start to shift, which hopefully they will soon, everyone's going to be hiring like crazy, and because they'll need to, because they'll be in growth mode again. And I think a headcount tool is so important for that, and really understanding what the true impact to your burn is. So when I was at Remote, we, again, grew 700 people net in my year there. And we were hiring all over the world. So we list a role and we could hire in the US or we could hire in South Africa. So you kind of never knew what the actual salary for this person would be. And we were hiring so many different people every month, as well as backfills, as well as new hire requests, et cetera. So when I was trying to manage the headcount plan at Remote, it would take me a few days to put it together because I would have a spreadsheet of what was requested and what was approved. Then I would say what's open from Greenhouse or what's been hired from Greenhouse, then who's actually started, and reconciling that to Remote's HIRS. There was no unique identifier between all of them. So it would take me days. I felt terrible. The recruiting team would be following up with me. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm still having this manual reconciliation. So I think we were way overdue for a headcount system at that point. But I think if there's ever miscommunications between finance, people team, or even people recruiting team and hiring managers, or finance and hiring managers, I think that is always a great time to get a tool in place. I think thinking about your planning cycles, and if you want to give managers some flexibility to think about their teams, I think that's always a good time. Again, headcount is such a large portion of company spend. And we've seen with like all the reductions, right? Maybe if some of these companies had a better headcount management tool, they could have not had to do the same kind of layoffs that they had to, or just kind of planned a little bit better. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important. And there's so many different things like you don't think about with headcount, like, oh, there's severance or benefits or commissions. And so having one place to manage it all and being able to collaborate with others, I think is so important. Just like a procurement tool.
Just like a procurement tool. Remind me again, when you joined Remote, was it a 300-person company?
Yeah, I think maybe 250.
250, okay.
Yeah, 300 to 250. I can't remember like between when I got my offer and when I joined, but yeah, they had grown a ton. I mean, they started that year, 2022, at 70 people. And so in 9 months, I think they went 70 to 300 and then added another 700.
And another 700 from there. When should companies start thinking about this thing? As the new era of growth unfolds and people start investing again.
Yeah.
In your mind, is there a magic number of employees when things start becoming unmanageable?
Yeah, I would necessarily think it's a magic number. Like I think like honestly, even companies like 50 could use this if they're growing fast. I think it depends
Okay.
on how frequently you're hiring, what kind of turnover you have, like what do your backfills look like, and just kind of how complex it is to manage headcount. You know, again, we're small, but also I have a team that works really closely with me and always keeps me in the loop. And so that makes it so I can manage headcount myself without a tool right now. Probably won't be
How
the
many
case for that much
people-
longer.
How
Yeah.
many people at Catalyst at this time? Ballpark?
We're 90.
90. Okay. All
Mhm.
right. Where does the responsibility lie to manage headcount? And where does the budget lie between talent, HR, hiring managers, and finance? So, how should both finance leaders or even CEOs listening to this podcast, what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on who manages headcount and who's
Yeah.
responsible for the budget to buy a tool like this?
That's a great question. I think every organization does things differently, right? Like when I joined Catalyst, we already had quite a few people on our people team, and they had done a great job of setting up like processes for some of these things. Sometimes finance comes first. So I think it depends company to company, because finance manages the budget. I think finance manages headcount with a lot of collaboration and support from recruiting and talent teams and the people teams. I think it's incredibly important for finance and recruiting to be in lockstep and treat each other as peers and partners throughout the recruiting process and building headcount plans, et cetera. You can't do it without each other. But I think at the end of the day, because finance is responsible for the budget and how this impacts the bottom line, I would say finance is probably responsible.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to choose a user, I would
Right,
choose finance. Now,
right.
granted, I'm biased. And I mean, I think for the tool, I think it makes both teams more productive. So I think it could go either way. I just know I'm used to being at places where finance is managing the hiring plan. It takes more work, like, and more spreadsheet time on finances end. So from that, I would say, like, I would put it into like my own budget, but it kind of depends company to company, but it does benefit both teams and just shows how closely they need to collaborate.
One more question comes to mind,
Mhm.
and would love your thoughts on this, is that
Yeah.
traditionally the FP&A team buys an FP&A software where workforce planning is a module. It exists, right? I mean,
Mhm.
traditionally Adaptive, Anaplan, Planful, all have some ways of managing headcount. And I think a lot of, especially given that the budgets are so constrained, people think about why one more tool? Why can't I repurpose an FP&A software?
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that? How should people think about pros and cons?
Yeah, I get it. There are a zillion tools out there. But I think take this from someone who has used Adaptive and Planful in the past, but it's been a while, right? I've been at mostly small companies for my past, or very growing companies that haven't gotten a larger planning system yet. But I think those tools typically aren't as collaborative on the headcount base. And also, if you are a company that's growing and changing a lot, you need something that is a tool that's pretty agile and you can work with all these different parties with. And so a lot of those, you can't get your greenhouse information in there. You have to like still do all these manual updates. It still takes a ton of time. And so maybe that's good for, this is where your budget is set, but like comparing and that can be kind of a gut check to comparing whatever your headcount tool says. But to get a real-time view of what your headcount is, even if you're using a bunch of HIRS tools, like if you have some contractors in a country and then you have like payroll, something else, sometimes you have to take multiple reports to be even like, who's at this company right now? What's their salary? And so I think something that can give you that unified view in real time, and this is where you are, is really important. And unfortunately, at least from my experience, I don't think any of those other planning tools are quite there yet, as well as the piece on just being able to collaborate with recruiting, hiring managers, finance all together, as well as just giving you that live view.
Right. So love it. Agility, collaboration, and single source of truth of headcount.
Great summary, yes.
Right. All right. Okay. let's get into planning now.
Mhm.
Because we talked about we are no longer growth at all costs.
Yeah.
And there's also aim to become some parts profitable, extend runway. How are these things influencing your annual budgeting or planning process?
I think when we're planning, and so we're starting to kick it off. And I think when we're planning, whether it's this fiscal year or like previous quarters, I'm not planning with, oh, we know that we can just keep burning and try to grow. And there's some VC money at the end of this for us. But that's not the case. I think a lot of, not just Catalyst, but a lot of companies are trying to work towards cash flow positivity so they can really take control of their own destiny, because I think we've seen in this market, that's the most important thing. We're trying to balance what's realistic, what we can do to keep our runway in a good place while still growing and improving all the metrics that are really important to us, such as retention and any efficiency metrics. So we're working to balance all that. And obviously you have to think about you're growing, you need to add salespeople, you need to add marketing spend, you need to fix these features or add these new features in order to expand more. So it's really just trying to prioritize and balance all that with the rest of the budget owners and figure out kind of where we want to be by end of year, whether that's like with runway or ARR, and then finding a way to work together to get there.
Are you seeing, because things change so often now, and now that you have set the apparatus to get real-time data, does it make sense to make a 12-month plan? Because
I make one. I have a 24-month plan, but we change it every quarter, honestly. I have kind of our board approved plan at the beginning of the year, and then we'll typically change revenue forecast, maybe not every quarter, but at least every like half, and then probably OpEx about the same. And granted, on OpEx, we're keeping everything like fairly flat. We've tried to get as efficient as we can. But I think at growth stages like us and kind of like where we are and also like where the market is, right? I'm optimistic that we've seen early signs that things are going to turn, but none of us really know. And so it's hard to say like, okay, will we see an explosion of growth because there's more VC funding and all this is coming into the market? Or do we think we can still keep growing steadily, but a little more cautiously? And so I think when you don't know that, I think you're going to have to be able to pivot quickly. So I always recommend having a few versions of the plan. So kind of best case scenario, likely scenario, worst case, but then also knowing that this will probably change in however many months, and make it easy with data to be able to change that and to be able to pivot quickly if you need to.
Let's role play. I'm the VP of engineering. You're the VP of finance, right?
Yeah.
My argument or my hypothesis or my assertion to you is I need to hire the engineers first who will build the product so that Mark can hire the salespeople to sell the product, right? So kind of like you have to grow headcount, you have to incur expenses before you can realize any kind of growth or profit.
Yep.
How do you balance this?
So I think it's first, I'm always, if we're going to do something like that, maybe I'll say, okay, let's hire one engineer and can we repurpose this other engineer that's working on X, Y, and Z to do this? And then if we feel like they have good velocity and that maybe I think first making sure whatever in this hypothetical situation that we feel is really sellable and that it will really contribute to our growth. Once we have indicators of that and whatever they're doing is working, maybe we'll say, okay, well, maybe we can invest one other person here, or can we change the roadmap on something else? So I think it's not necessarily saying yes to everything or saying no to everything. It's just, what are the resources we have? What are we trying to achieve? Where is that on our priority list? And what can we reprioritize to get there? Or if not, okay, maybe we add this one engineer because we need to go to market earlier with this product, et cetera. But I'll need a commitment from Mark that he can sell this like as soon as possible, and that we'll get X in sales for that will compensate for this hire, right? So it's just trying to kind of find the balance, that trying to keep your burn where it is, try to keep your growth still on a good trajectory. And so just finding a balance based on the resources you have and figuring out how to make it work.
Right. It almost sounds like planning cannot just sit in one silo because it's such a connected process.
It is.
If you if you spend money on X,
Yeah.
how will that affect Y, team composition, future sales? So it's
Yeah.
fascinating how the fabric of the company now has to really change into not operating in silos, but trying to come together. Do you feel that is a lot of pressure on finance leaders now to become that central point that pulls everyone together, keeps them aligned on the same thing?
It's nice. I think tech industry in general kind of probably gotten some bad habits in the last couple of years. And I think the companies that come out of this will be much stronger because they've all kind of learned to work together, to prioritize, to not just throw money at this problem. And so I, in general, really, I like it. And I think I'm lucky I have a wonderful leadership team that I work with, and we all are very collaborative with each other. So I enjoy it. And I think it makes us all respect each other more in the decisions we have to make and each other's roles more, and makes all of us more considerate of each other and work well together. So I think it's great.
Let's end with sharing some advice now. Two types of advice. We'll start with you're already a VP of finance, but you're working with very strong personalities, CRO, CTO.
Yeah.
Let's assume they all have the right intentions, but they've learned some bad habits, or
Yeah.
they've been operating at a different level without financial oversight, right? See, at the end of the day, you are providing oversight. Is there any advice you'll give to bring people together? Is it something that the CEO has to do from the top down, or does it take time to change your habits?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely always good if the CEO gives that messaging, right? I think that's important because at the end of the day, that's probably who these people report to, not VP of finance. But I don't think it necessarily has to come or start with the CEO. I think breaking bad financial habit, I think it can definitely take time, but I really think, kind of to my earlier points of really walking through like the why and really understanding, okay, what are you asking of me? This is what I can give you, or this is why I can't give it to you. And how can we work together? And I think once you have a few of those conversations with someone who may have been in some bad habits in the past, I think they'll really understand, okay, especially if they're an executive, that this has a real impact to the business. If I want to hire these 30 engineers, this reduces burn by like X amount of time, and we don't want to do that. And so I think really explaining and like sitting with them and really trying to collaborate, I think that is, at least for me, that's what made kind of, I think, my partnerships with other leaders so successful, and made people feel like they want to come to me when they have a problem instead of, let's not go to finance, they're just going to say no.
We were having a similar conversation the other day about your superpower. I think now we are at that time in our conversation where you share that superpower with everybody.
Yes. Thanks to share. So I think I have two superpowers, and I'll go through the one that you're referencing first. So I think the first one is really being able to find a way to break down complex financial scenarios or metrics or what's going on into something that is easily comprehensible for everyone, or for at least like someone in their specific role, right? And so I think that is something that, from what I've heard, other leaders are missing in their finance leaders. And I think it's just because you have your blinder goggles on. And I think that's something that's made me, again, really effective as a leader and a good partner, because first I try to understand where all my peers are coming from. And I think because we're a small company, because I like worn a variety of hats in my past lives, I really do understand, at least on a pretty good level, what all my peers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and like why they might be asking for something or why something's important. I think having that empathy for what they're kind of going through, and then being able to explain it from a financial perspective and something that they can easily understand, has been pretty effective for me, at least. So that's one. The other one is, I think, because I've been at startups for so long, and even as I'm a VP now, but like I'm still paying bills. I'm still like doing a lot and in Excel spreadsheets all the time. We're a very small team. And so I am able to kind of go from 0 to 100, going from having discussion with board members to like explaining a commission calc to an SDR in a matter of a few minutes. And so I think that's something else that makes me a little unique, where I really understand what everyone on my team is working on, can help them problem solve. And at these earlier stage companies where you have to do a lot of different things, I can really make sure that we're set up for success longer term by getting good processes in place, even if they are like a little more low level than you think what a VP of finance would work on now, instead of having to suffer and hire a zillion people later.
Yeah. If you keep sharing any more details, other CEOs will try to poach you, and then your CEO will be very mad at me. But I think this is a great opportunity for us to stop, stay hands-on, learn how to storytell, show empathy. Those are some great superpowers. And yeah, this was a great conversation. Thank you, Deirdre.
Sure.
All right.
Appreciate it.